Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing another episode of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to compare to the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got part 158, so definitely a long road, but hopefully we've got more comings. I know it's been a bit slower at the moment, and I'm going to try and get some of those other videos I've been on about. But yeah, I'm quite excited to get stuck in this one because these are some really interesting mods that I'm really excited to get stuck into. So we're going to be starting off today with the black-bellied whistling duck done by Lorby. So let's have a look at these little guys down here. So these are also called the black-bellied tree duck. Their scientific name is Dendrocina autumnalis. And they're a whistling duck that is, before 2000, considerably found around most in the southern United States, into Mexico, through the south, tropical central and south central South America. And it can be found year-round in most of the US, which is very interesting. So it was first described by English naturalist George Edwards, using included illustration of this, and they called it the red-billed whistling duck. And then kind of found it in, they got a new name. It was originally under the genus Anas, which is the mallard duck, but it was often split into its own genus. So Dendrocina basically used it to distinguish it from other waterfowl. And the genus name, as we mentioned, a tree. So dendron means tree. This is basically tree swan, or like tree, basically tree swan. And the specific epithet or the species name is autumnal. Autumnalis means kind of autumn. And there are two different subspecies known that integrate in Panama. The northern subspecies is the one that found around southwestern Texas and places like that, which is fulgens, which is larger with a brown breast and upper back. And the type species, or the type subspecies, is typically found down south in Ecuador and northern Argentina, which is a bit smaller with grey breast and upper back, which is quite interesting. So the black whistling duck is a mid-sized waterfowl. Its kind of size ranges between 47 to 56 centimeters, about 19 to 22 inches, and body mass between 652 to just over a kilogram, between like 1.4 to 2.2 pounds, with a wingspan of about 76 to 94 centimeters, or about 30 to 37 inches. And so you can see that long pink bill with like a white tip to it. Also got that long head and longest legs, pale grey head, and mostly grey-brown plumage. The belly you can see in the tail is kind of like a black, and the rest of it's kind of a rich chestnut brown. And you can see their face and upper neck are grey, but they do have like a thin white eye ring, which is quite interesting. And among whistling ducks, which is very interesting and unique, is they actually can be hard to discern the light flanks, which are present in many of these waterfowl. And the Fulvorous whistling duck, or deer bicolor, is the only other type of whistling duck that has such a flank, which is quite interesting. And where they get their name whistling is because they make a whistling sound, quite noisy, like a wachu kind of call, which is quite interesting. In terms of its habitat, the species is typically found widely across the American continent, to the north including parts of the United States, so Texas, Arizona, Louisiana, and Mexico, like around Yucatan, southern Mexico, and Baja California. And they can then continue down to Central and South America, to Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. And while they are not considered migratory, they are covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, as they, in the heart of their range, do travel in flocks over the winter months, though not like a really long range one, just more local areas. They move just to probably get better food availability. In the 21st century, they have been observed in more Midwestern states. They've been observed in Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Missouri, and even been spotted in the eastern US and even in Canada, so that's quite interesting. In terms of its ecology, these guys are considered quite tame even in the wild, and are highly social or gregarious, so they like being around large flocks, and is largely resident apart from local movements, so they tend to stay in the same area. They usually nest in hollow trees, and even sometimes in South America in palm trees. With their habitat is usually quite shallow freshwater, ponds, lakes, and marshes, with lots of vegetation that includes reservoirs as well, where the duck feeds on main at night on seeds and other plant foods. So in terms of breeding, these guys are actually quite unique among ducks. We'll have a look at little baby. They're quite unique among ducks for having a strong monogamous pair bond. So the pair will often stay together for many years, which is a trait that's actually more often associated with geese and swans. And both parents will take care of the baby, including incubation and taking care of the rearing the young and things like that. Both parents will share that, and the ducks primarily are cavity nesters, so they will prefer the confines of the hollow tree, for example, to raise their nest, have their nest, but they will lay on the ground if they need to. And they also make use of chimneys, abandoned buildings, or nest boxes. The latter has been increasingly provided to them in decades, especially around Mexico and Texas. People making big nests for them, which is quite cool. Ducks sleep from nest cavities within 2 days of hatching and can feed themselves immediately and stay with their parents. But you can see they're not too different colours from their parents. They've got that really interesting band. Very interesting band, not too similar from other baby ducklings. And in terms of food and feeding, they're typically nocturnal, so they typically come out during the night to eat, but they typically can be encountered eating any hour of the day. Black-bellied whistling ducks are just a large variety of plant material that includes like corn, rice, millets, weeds, and grasses, so quite a variety. But they will also consume arthropods like insects and spiders as well. Aquatic invertebrates such as snails, mollusks, larvae of various different things, and also tadpoles when they are available, so they are pretty generalist in that regard. They will often feed on submerged vegetation by wading through shallow water, and as their Latin name implies, they're actually often seen gleaning recently harvested fields, so fields that have been harvested for leftover seeds and invertebrates brought up by the harvesters disturbing the soil, so it's a great way to find extra food. And the black whistling duck is listed as a species of least concern, so they are doing quite well, and may have increased because of agriculture. And the population is estimated to be at the moment between 1.1 to 2 million birds and increasing. So they're one of those few species that are actually doing quite well in human presence, which is interesting. And still a cool animal. They do deserve a bit of love, like this cool duck. Another great one by Lorby as well. Lorby did a great job. I love all this luck, the Swan mod giving us all this lovely things for waterfowl, things like that. Quite awesome. All right. So next up, we're going to have a look at the wood duck. So this is the Australian wood duck done by Great Cakes Mods. A really, really cool animal here. So here's a male. I love the male. So the Australian wood duck, also known as the Maine duck or Maine goose, and their scientific name is Chionetta jubia, are a dabbling duck that is found throughout much of Australia, and the only living species in their genus Chionetta. And they were traditionally considered a dabbling duck, but they might actually belong more to the subfamily of Tenoridae, which is the shell ducks, like Australian shell ducks and paradise shell ducks, things like that. Though it's a ringtail, maybe its closest relative. So the Australian wood duck was first described by an English ornithologist, John Latham, in 1801 under the binomial name Anas jubis. So again, was split to its own. There's the only other member or species of its genus is the extinct flightless New Zealand duck, the Finch's duck, or Chionetta finchi, which was formerly believed to be monotypic, but is determined to be closely related to the Australian wood duck. And it's believed to be extinct before scientists could probably survey the apifauna, but possibly as late as the 1870s. So yeah, could have had a close relative until quite recently. And its name kind of means goose duck. Chionetta means goose duck, and jubata means kind of like crested mane or mane crest, which is interesting. So in terms of their description, these guys are about 45 to 51 centimeters long. They are a duck. They look like a small goose, and they look like a small goose, and primarily and mostly feed by grazing in flocks. You can see the males are grey with a dark brown head and mottled kind of breast, but the female will have a white stripe down her eye, as we'll look at. You can see one over there. They've got like a white stripe down their eye. It's kind of in a more mottled appearance. You can kind of see the difference there. So you can see her in comparison. Both sexes have grey wings and black primaries and a white spectrum. And juveniles are similar to adult females, but lighter and have a more streaky breast, as we'll get into. So in terms of their habitat, these guys are considered widespread across Australia, including Tasmania, and they can be found in grasslands, open woodlands, wetlands, flooded pastures all along the coasts and inlets and bays. They're also quite common on farmlands with dams, as well as rice fields, sewage ponds, and in urban parks. So they'll often be found around deeper lakes, which is unsuitable for other species of duck because these guys prefer to forage on land. And they have been recorded as vagrants in New Zealand, although it's 2015 and 2016. A pair actually successfully bred, which was pretty cool. So one of the cool things is their call. So they do have a call that's like a loud, risking, croaky call sound by the females. And the males sound the same, except it's a bit smoother, shorter, and higher than the females, which is interesting. And in terms of their protection, even though they are native to Australia, they are hunted. So they are widespread and has benefited a lot from agriculture. So have more ready access to water and things like that, they have benefited a lot, especially like agriculture. So they are very common in urban areas, and they're permanent water sources like dams, ponds, pools, irrigated grass, things like urban parks and residential nature strips. So this means they are doing quite well, and this means they're also considered a game bird, so they are hunted recreationally, and they have been declared pests in some areas, though they are native. But luckily, with good management, they can be harvested and things like that. So it's good that they are sustainable, and they are considered least concern. So in terms of reproduction, very similar to other species, we'll have a look at these cute little guys. They nest in cavities in trees or nest boxes above the water, with nests being made of a pile of down. So they definitely much like to, pack down all that stuff and make nests, very similar to a lot of other species of, like the whistling duck and other species of duck. They will build this nest in a tree cavity and lay about 9 to 11 creamy white eggs, similar to those of mandarin ducks. And the female will incubate them while the male stands guard, and once the ducklings are ready to leave the nest, the female will fly to the ground, and then the ducklings leap onto the ground and follow their parents. And the males will also secure their ducklings closely along with the females, so they are good dads. In terms of their feeding, the Australian wood duck eats grasses, grains, clovers, and other herbs, and occasionally insects, and they're really seen on open water, preferring to forage and dabbling in shallow water or on grasslands or crops. And in terms of similar species, they can be distinguished from the pygmy geese, which are smaller and have bold markings. And whistling ducks typically have longer necks, things like that. And they're the only duck with secondary feathers, with white secondary feathers and dark wingtips. That's another cool way to tell them apart. And look at how many babies they have. It's so very, very cute. So this is another banger from, Great Cakes Mod. She's gone on a bit of a break recently, but it's nice to have some wonderful mods still coming out occasionally. And she's going to come back soon, so that'll be cool. Really, really awesome. So let's carry on. We've got here with the yellow pangolin, we've got the western grey kangaroo, along with the subspecies Kangaroo Island western kangaroo. So we'll get into that. So let's have a look at these guys. This is the male. Look at this Chad right here. So the western grey kangaroo, or Macropus fogosus, also known as the western grey giant kangaroo, black-faced kangaroo, Malay kangaroo, Sotho-Kaliroo, and the Kangaroo Island grey kangaroo. These guys are a large and very common species of kangaroo that are found entirely around the southern part of Australia, just south from Shark Bay, throughout Western and South Australia to Victoria and the entire Murray-Darling Basin in New South Wales and Queensland. So they were long known by the Aborigines, but for Europeans it take them a great deal to actually find the species because they were thought to be just the same grey kangaroo across Australia. So they first found them, but Matthew Findlers kind of landed on Kangaroo Island in 1802. They shot some for food, but assumed they were eastern greys. And then they actually captured central of these and then kind of recognised them. They were indeed distinct, and then found them as a different species in 1817. And then they were also described incorrectly as being native to Tasmania, which is not true. And then it was not until 1924 that the Foss's kangaroo was actually found to be the Macropus giganteus, which is the western one, or eastern one, which is interesting. And they're typically found around, they're not found as north or far southeast as Australia, but the eastern kangaroo does not extend far past the New South Wales, South Australia border. But the two species do actually live in the Murray-Darling Basin area together. They don't often really interbreed in the wild, but they have been able to produce eastern grey female hybrids between eastern grey females and western grey males, which is quite interesting. And there is two subspecies. So the type species, or the non-type species, is the Macropus fulginans melanops. So this is the mainland subspecies. So this is the one you'll find anywhere in mainland Australia, like these guys here. And we've got here the Kangaroo Island subspecies, which are not too different. You can see they're a lot more just kind of a greener, not greener, but like a browner color in comparison. But still really, really cool. We'll have a look at these guys for a minute. So these guys are considered one of the largest macropods, or one of the largest, and even marsupials in Australia. And really one of the largest ever up there, especially because they're considered almost like megafaunal status. Really, really cool. We'll have a look at you. So they weigh between 28 and 54 kilograms, or 62 to 120 pounds. And they have a length between 0.8 to 1.1 meter, or about 2'9" to 3'7", with an A1 0.8 to 1.0 meter, so basically 2 to 3 feet tail, and can stand about 4 feet tall. And they exhibit quite stark sexual dimorphism, with males being up to twice the size of the females. And they do have thick, coarse hair that can range from pale grey to brown, and its throat and chest area have been, paler in colour. So you can see some of the difference. Kangaroo Island ones are a little bit more browner, for example. Looks quite cool, don't they? I love the cute little baby as well. Though this species is kind of hard to tell apart from the eastern grey. The main way to tell them apart, they have darker grey-brown fur, darker coloration around the head, and sometimes have a blackest patch on the elbow. So that's the other way you kind of tell them apart. So in terms of their diet, these guys will feed on typically forbs and grasses. So they're typically grazers, but they will also feed on shrubs and low trees. And they do have a nickname as a stinker, because mature males do have a curry-like odor that they have, which is quite interesting. And they're also a really interesting species as they're able to thermoregulate a little bit. So they are able to vary its core body temperature depending on the ambient temperature of the world around it. So the lowest daily core temperature occurs mid-morning, and it's typically only like 4 degrees lower than cool summer days, so it allows them to save energy, especially when food availability is low. And in terms of reproduction, which is really interesting for these guys, is like a lot of kangaroos, they can, I'll get into that. So Western grey kangaroos live in groups to about 15, where males will compete for the females during the breeding season. And during these boxing contests, they will try and push and fight with each other. I'm sure you've seen videos of it. And usually only the dominant male in the group gets to mate with the females. The gestation period is very short, about 30-31 days, where it would be developed as an incomplete fetus. So it would only be like a little jelly bean with arms, pretty much. And is referred to the joey, and then it will climb up into the mother's pouch and live there again for another 130 to 150 days. Then the females will reach sexual maturity to about 17 months, while males reach maturity to about 20 months. So what's very interesting about these guys is they're able to go through embryonic diapause, and they're able to be pregnant pretty much nearly constantly. So basically they have 3 uteruses. And they also to pretty much be pregnant with one joey, and they can pause that joey while they have one in the pouch, and then they can have one outside the pouch that's still suckling on mum, or even not even suckling on mum. So they're able to be basically constantly pregnant, and it's allowed them to still be quite common even with all the threats. Still quite common even with the hunting and stuff they face. And the Western grey kangaroo is closely related to Eastern grey, but their distribution overlaps, especially in the Murray-Darling habitat or basin. Even though they're only really interbreed in the wild, although hybridization occurs in both directions in the overlap zone between the two species, does not seem to be the case with captive animals. Although interbreeding between the two species does occasionally occur in captivity, viable offspring only occurs when the mating is like a female Eastern grey and a male Western grey. So this seems to be an example of unidirectional hybridization. So typically only works one way, which is interesting. And you can see the size difference in the male and female there. In terms of its relationship with humans, they are considered least concern, and their population seems to be increasing. Total population within the commercial harvest areas is believed to be about 3.7 million as of 2020. And through the feeding habits of the species, they can be problematic for agriculture, And even though they are protected and controlled exclusively by state faunal authorities, they're considered competition for water and pasture for ranchers, and are considered pests in some areas. And due to the damage they do, kangaroo culling has become a part of be allowed licenses each year. So you can, hunt kangaroos, and people do eat them. So you can get commercial hunting for meat and skin, where they use the skin for leather and eat the meat. And commercial hunting is permitted pretty much throughout their entire range, and luckily they're still quite common, so it's not a problem for them. And there's actually evidence to suggest that they might be doing better because of humans, because we make a lot more water and things like that, which is quite interesting. So that's our Western Grey and both the kangaroo, island kangaroo, both done by yellow pangolin. And the next one is also done by yellow pangolin. We have got its sister species, the Eastern Grey. So this is Macropus giganteus. Let's have a look at these guys. Macropus giganteus, and is found from the eastern third of Australia, so around Sydney, places like that, and was also known as the great grey kangaroo or the foster kangaroo. So these guys also have two different subspecies. There's M. giganteus. So these are found around Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales, and southeastern South Australia. And then the Tasmaniensis subspecies, also known as forester's kangaroo, is already found in Tasmania. So they are the second largest marsupial and living marsupial native land mammal in Australia. An adult male typically weighs between 50 to 66 kilograms, or 110 to 146 pounds, where the females are about between 17 and 40 kilograms, or 37 to 88 pounds. They have a powerful tail that's over a meter long in adult males, and these guys are quite large, so they can occasionally get heavier than your red kangaroos, but kangaroos are much lankier, so that means they're typically taller. So some of these extreme individuals was one shot in Tasmania that was about 8 feet long and about 82 kilograms, and the largest known specimen was about 91 kilograms, or just over 200 pounds, and measured about 2.92 meters, or about 9 feet 7 inches. Along the curve. So this seems to be, very large. So even if they reach the similar dimensions, they're much heavier than a red kangaroo, which is much lankier. They're quite easy to recognize. They have a distinctive coat that's kind of soft grey. Red kangaroos are sometimes thought to be grey-blue in colour and have a totally different face. They also have distinctive black muzzles, and they're typically found in different habitats anyway. And there are areas where they do overlap with the Western Greys, which they are closely related. They have very similar body structure and things like that. Though it's not obvious at a distance, you can kind of see the differences between them. Eastern Grey's colour tends to be light grey or brownish grey with a light silver cream, with the wedge being a darker dusty colour with more contrast around the head. And the highest ever recorded speed for any kangaroo was a large female Eastern Grey, that was recorded to be up to 40 miles per hour, or about 64 kilometres an hour, which is quite interesting. So, even though the red kangaroo is known better, you're most likely to encounter, if you go to Australia, a Eastern Grey. So these guys, live around Sydney and Brisbane, which are much more populated than a lot of other places in Australia. So few Australians visit the interior of the continent, while many live around the major cities on the southern and eastern coasts, from where these guys often a short drive near the city. They can be found in urban or suburban areas. They typically prefer grasslands, woodlands, coastal areas, tropical rainforests, subtropical rainforests, and scrubs, which is quite cool. And like all kangaroos, they are mainly nocturnal or crepuscular, so they mostly will be seen early in the morning or as the light starts to fade. In the middle of the day, kangaroos rest in the cover of the woodlands and eat there, but they still come out on the open to feed the grasslands in large numbers. And the Eastern Grey kangaroo is predominantly a grazer, eating a wide variety of grasses, while some other species, like the red kangaroo, will just eat a lot more shrubs, so these guys are much more grazers. And they are quite gregarious and will form open membership groups. So they typically live in a group structure that's an average of 3 individuals. Smaller groups will kind of join the greys to preferred foraging areas, and then rest in large groups in the middle of the day, with a dominance hierarchy, with the dominant individual gaining better access to food and shade. However, kangaroos are not territorial. They will adjust their behavior in relation to the risk of predation and also reproductive females. Individuals on the variety of the groups are variety of the group, and individuals in group far from cover become the most vigilant. And vigilance is important since they do not seem to they are more aware. Even when there's more kangaroos, they tend to be a lot more vigilant of what's going on, which is quite interesting. However, there is a tendency for the individuals, a portion of the individuals, to be a little bit more decline as the group size increases, and the membership of this group allows more kangaroos to join, and that's more of a buff against predators. As I mentioned, very similar to Western Greys, these guys are polygamous, and one male will mate with multiple females. They do a lot of fighting with each other, and then they'll find a female mate with her. And the females will actually have strong kingships. So females with living female relatives have a bigger chance of reproducing, and most kangaroo births will occur in the summer. And Eastern Greys are obligate breeders, and they can only reproduce typically in one kind of habitat. As I mentioned, they are usually pregnant. They will have an embryonic diapause thing as well, and they'll often milk will vary. They can make different types of milk to help the joey grow both inside and outside the pouch. So it's very common in kangaroos. The joey is typically heavily reliant on its mother for about 550 days, in which they are weaned, and they become sexually mature at about 17 to 28 months, while males mature at about 25 months. In terms of their status, and it's believed to be because, even though this is not really substantiated by evidence, the population of kangaroos have increased a lot due to colonization as they increase grassland and reduce dingo numbers, and also artificial watering holes for them to drink from. And even some places they are so numerous, they are overgrazing areas, and some individual populations have been culled in some parts of Australia. And despite this commercial harvest of some culls, they're actually quite still common and widespread. So they are still found quite common around areas where they're found, or should be found, like Western Australia, Eastern Australia, which is quite cool. They're also quite common in suburban and rural areas, and have been observed forming larger groups there than in natural areas. And that still covers their entire range, where before Europeans occupied, Australia in 1788. And they do often come into conflict with farmers in more fertile areas that now carry crops and exotic pastures, which these guys will eat, no worries. And they've actually considered using kangaroo meat to replace beef in some areas, because kangaroos are much softer on the ground, especially since these guys don't have the hooves like cows do, to help places that are erosion prone. So farming kangaroos in the areas like that instead of cows. So that's a very interesting alternative. Very, very cool. So we'll let these guys run off. We'll have a look at the cute little baby as well, because we didn't get a chance to. Oh, there we are. So let's have a look at you. Look at this little cutie, little baby joey. They're so cute, aren't they? Really, really awesome. All right, we'll carry on. So next up, this one was all three of these, the Kangaroo Island, Kangaroo Western and Eastern Greys, all done by Yellow Pangolin. Our next one is another really awesome monsoon mod, which I'm really excited to take a look at. So we've got here the Przewalski's Gazelle. So the Przewalski's Gazelle, or Procapra przewalski, is a member of the family Bovidae and is found only in China. And it was considered once widespread. Its range has declined to only 6 populations found around the Quanchita Lake. And it was first discovered by Nikolai Przewalski, which was a Russian explorer who collected the specimen and brought it back to St. Petersburg in 1875. Very much like the Przewalski's horse. So these guys are relatively small, slender antelopes with large eyes and small pointed ears. And their nasal bone is relatively large, suggesting that they are well adapted for breathing the thin air of the Tibetan Plateau. They have a head to body length of about 109 to 160 centimeters, or about 43 to 63 inches, a shoulder height of 50 to 70 centimeters, or 20 to 28 inches, and a weight between 17 and 32 kilograms, or about 37 to 71 pounds. Males are typically larger and heavier than the females, and they do have a short tail that can sometimes be entirely hidden by fur. Males typically will also have horns that reach between 18 to 26 centimeters, or about 7 to 10 inches, and the females themselves are hornless. In terms of their coloration, they're kind of a yellowish brown with a white underside and a white heart-shaped rump with a kind of bisected light brown ventral line. Males are considerably darker in color than females, though their coats get more greyish in the winter. The fur also lacks an undercoat, consisting of only really dense guards hairs, and the male Przewalskis have these ridged, horns, as you can kind of see here, that will often, kind of curve inward and out at the tips. And younger males, the tips may actually touch, but they diverge with age, which is quite interesting. And you can see they're also quite similar in relation to, Tibetan gazelles and Mongolian gazelles, both of which are closely related, that they are intermediate in size and can be really distinguished by the shape of their horns. So let's find a female so we can talk about her. There we are. So, in terms of their distribution and habitat, sadly, until the early 20th century, they used to be quite widespread across northwestern China and Inner Mongolia. However, there is now only found in a small area around Quanjing Lake, being extirpated from most of their range, which is very sad. But they now inhabit they typically inhabit flat, open valleys and steppelands between mountains, and else sand dunes or semi-deserts. And there have been two subspecies described, even though potentially one is considered extinct. So in terms of their behavior and ecology, these guys feed on sedges and grasses, but they will eat herbs and shrubs as well. They typically are found foraging with Tibetan gazelles, but do not compete for resources as they prefer legumes. So it's a little bit of niche partitioning there. Such associations with related species allow for larger herds, which allows for better protection against predators for both species. They usually will travel in smaller groups, rarely more than a dozen individuals, although much larger herds were reported in the 19th century. So it's most likely because there's not enough to really form large herds. So when their population was much higher, there was a lot more larger herds. Males are often solitary or travel in small groups of about 2 to 3 individuals through much of the year, but they will gather with small herds of females during the winter rut. And Przewalski's gazelles are typically quiet, but they have been known to make bleating sounds. So they're typically other gazelles type of things. Przewalski's gazelle ruts last from late December to early January, with males scent marking small territories and will fight rivals with their horns. And they've also been observed females have also been observed fighting for access to males, which is quite interesting. In courtship will typically consist of the male moving towards the female while standing on his hind legs, and it copulates. Typically, we'll have a look at the cute little baby as we talk about their gestation. A little cutie. Anyway, gestation typically lasts for about 6 months, so that the young are born around May or June. The mother will give birth typically to a single offspring, usually in the thickets of areas of tall grass, where they can be sealed by predators. The young also are able to follow their mother within a few months of being born, although they may remain concealed for a few days before rejoining the herd. Females become fertile during their second year, about 18 months of age, and the lifespan of Przewalski's gazelles are unknown, but they're believed to be, based on related species, live for about 8 years. So sadly, these guys were actually considered, or maybe still considered, one of the most endangered large mammal species in the world. They face many threats, including competition with domestic livestock and the fencing of their habitat, and a lot of this has been extirpated as the areas are being converted into habitat, for agricultural land, so habitat loss, things like that. Also, hunting was a big issue back historically, but now they are protected by Chinese law, so they are pretty much protected. A large percentage of their habitat is already lost from human activities, and they were considered an endangered species. They are considered to be endangered species by IUCN. And formerly, they actually thought to be much more endangered. There was only believed to be fewer than 250, so they were considered critically endangered. However, they have found several other small populations now between 2003 and 2006. So this puts the population, was believed to be about 400 individuals, or even more potentially. With 2020, the population has exceeded about 3,000 is the modern estimates for their population, but this species still still face a lot of several threats, as I mentioned, like potentially climate change, conversion of agricultural land of their habitat, conversion, domestic livestock, things like that. A lot of threats that they can and do still face, but hopefully they'll get into it, and we get more Przewalskis in the future. They're very cool animals. And another great banger from Monsoon. Monsoon always makes some wonderful mods. And now we've got a remake. So this is a remake of by Bongo Hardwood of one of their older mods. We have got the Roan Gazelle, which is quite awesome. We'll have a look at the female, then we'll talk about the male. Alright, so the Roan Gazelle, or Roan antelope, or Hippotragus equinus, is a large savanna-dwelling antelope from western, central, and southern America. They are named from its roan color, which is like a reddish-brown. And they have light underbellies, white eyebrows, and cheeks, and black faces, lighter in the females. And they have short, erect manes, very light beards, and prominent red nostrils, as you can kind of see there. They are one of the largest antelope species and measure between 190 to 240 centimeters, or 75 to 94 inches from head to tail, and have about a 37 to 48 centimeter, about 15 to 19 inch long tail. Males are quite big. They typically weigh between 242 to 300 kilograms, or about between 554, 34, and 661 pounds. And females between 223 to 280 kilograms, or about 492 to 617 pounds, with a shoulder height between 130 to 140 centimeters, or about 51 to 55 inches. So in terms of its taxonomy, they share the genus Hippotragus with the sadly extinct bluebuck and the sable antelope as a member of the family Bovinidae. They were first described by Geoffrey St. Helger in 1803, and the species name Equinus actually refers to their quite horse-like appearance, and you can kind of see it. They kind of looks like they've got like a circle hoof. They do kind of look superficially horse-like in a lot of ways. Though in 1996, there was evidence looking at the DNA suggests that the specimens of black bucks actually were not a subspecies of roan antelope, and they're actually their own distinct species, and they clade outside both roan and sable antelopes, which is quite interesting. And there are 6 different subspecies described, but I'm not sure how many people actually take stock in a lot of them. They're just kind of different isolated populations. As I mentioned, they are quite a large antelope, and they do have a horse-like build. They're one of the largest antelopes in the world. Only things like elands, bongos, and large male greater kudus are bigger. And we already mentioned their weight and things like that, and their mane, things like that. So they've got that kind of really short greyish mane along their back, along the middle of their withers. Their horns, you can see, are ringed and arched backwards, and they can reach about a metre or 39 inches in males. Females are slightly shorter, as we'll get to have a look. So that's our male. This is the female here. Oh, no. What's that with issues like that today? Anyway, so this is the male. Female. It's the slightly shorter horns. And they are somewhat similar in appearance to sable antelopes, and they can be confused, but sable antelopes are mainly darker and more like brownish black colours than rather dark brown. So they're more darker colour than these lighter antelopes. In terms of behaviour, they are not too different from other antelope species. They can be found in woodlands, savannas, and grasslands, mainly in tropical savannas and grasslands, savannas, and scrublands, where they don't like a lot of cover. They range in T-density from forest to grassy understory, with dark grasslands dotted with a few trees, and they typically feed on taller mid-level grasses. And they can live in small groups and form harems of about 5 to 15 individuals with one dominant male. Males will commonly fight among themselves for dominance in their herd, bashing horns, trying to bring them to their knees. So they can be a bit of a fighter. And we'll have a look at these cute little babies. Look at that cute little baby with those big ears. How adorable are they? We just need to appreciate this cute little guy. So yeah, another great banger from Monsoon. Monsoon really did an awesome job with these ones. So last but certainly not least, we've got a very interesting animal we have got here by Tosco DS. We have got the vampire squid. It's another really cool one. We'll have a look at the bioluminescence later. I'll kind of make everything dark. So the vampire squid, or Vampire tethys infernalis, or the vampire squid from hell. They're a small cephalopod that's typically found in temperate and tropical oceans and the extreme deep sea. They use their bioluminescent organs and unique oxygen metabolism to live in parts of the ocean with the lowest concentration of oxygen, which is really interesting. So, in terms of their discovery, they were first discovered in the Valandina expedition between 1898 and 1899 by Carl Chun. They were zoologists who were inspired by the Challenger expedition to try and find life below 500 meters. And they did obviously find a lot. They were fitted out with equipment to try and have a look at deep-sea organisms. And they found these guys and actually compared them to fossils of extinct relatives so they had fossils of extinct, vampire squids, quote-unquote, from the Cretaceous. So most of these guys, their history is found in the Jurassic Cretaceous. So this makes them a great example of a Lazarus taxon. So this is a species that has been kind of like lost for a long time and then comes back for whatever reason, be it, either they've just been rediscovered, or we just found like a whole group of them where they haven't been in the fossil record. So a great example of that is, of course, the coelacanth, and these guys are not the great example. So most of the fossil records believed, if you just looked at the fossil record, they would have gone extinct around the Cretaceous, though they lived through the Jurassic and Cretaceous or the Mesozoic, and there were no records of them post the Mesozoic until these guys were discovered. So it seems like these guys are, around today. Really, really interesting. So that's a great example of a Lazarus taxon. So in terms of their description, these guys reach about a maximum total length of about 30 centimeters, or just about a feet long, and have a 15 centimeter gelatinous body that varies in color from like a velvety jet black to a pale red, depending on lighting conditions, things like that. They have a webbing of skin around its 8 arms, each lined with like rows of fleshy spines or cerci. And the inner side of its cloak is black. Only the distal halves, or the farthest from the body, have suckers. And they have lipid globular eyes, you can see there, which, depending on lighting, kind of glow either red or blue. And actually, they're the largest in proportion to their body of any animal in the animal kingdom, with a 2.5 centimeter or 1 inch diameter. And their name of kind of their vampire squid is because of their cloak and dark color. Rather than its habits, as these guys are not vampires, they don't feed on blood, they feed on detritus, so they are detritivores. Mature adults have like a pair of small fins on their, projecting from their mantle, that allows them to propel themselves, and they flap their fins to kind of swim away. And their beak-like jaws are white, and with their webbing there are 2 kind of pouches where the tactile velar filaments are concealed. And these filaments are kind of analogous, as you can see, they're floating around there. They are analogous to the tentacles in a true squid, extending well past the arms, but different origin, and represent the pair that was lost in the sexual octopus. So we'll get into a little bit of their taxonomy soon. And these guys are very interesting, as like most octopus and squid and cuttlefish, they use chromatophores to change their colors and things like that. These guys are they're covered in more things called photophores, so they're able to produce light. So they're able of producing flashes of light ranging from durations of fractions of seconds to several minutes. So these can also be modulated by them, and is used just hunt prey and scare predators, things like that. So they're able to use these photophores to create light to do things like that. And you can see it appears as small white discs on their back. You also see it on the tips of their arms and on their eyes as well, which is quite interesting. So they do have a lot of photoreceptors. And the chromatophores that most octopus and squid and cuttlefish have, they don't have, because they live in the darkness of the ocean. Why do they need it? But they don't really have that ability to change their color, since that ability would be useless when no one can see you do it. Typically, their habitat, and some of the really interesting adaptations they have for their habitat, because they live, they're an extreme example of a deep sea cephalopod. So they live in lightness conditions between 600 and 900 meters, or 2,000 to 3,000 feet down. And within this range in the Earth's kind of world's oceans is kind of discrete habitat known as the oxygen minimum zone. So, and within this zone, it's actually the saturation of oxygen within the water is so low, it doesn't support anaerobic metabolism. And they're the only cephalopod known to live within this minimum zone, with oxygen saturations being as low as 3%. And they do have a worldwide range, but are typically found in tropical and subtropical waters. To cope living down here, they do have a lot of really cool adaptations. They do have the lowest metabolism of any animal of its size, per size. Their blue buds hemocyanin binds and transports oxygen much more efficiently than a lot of other cephalopods. They also have gills with large surface areas, and they also have greatly reduced shells and a weak musculature that allow them to maintain agility and things like that. And they also have sophisticated statocysts, which allow them to keep their buoyancy and things like that with little effort. And they also have aluminum-rich gelatinous tissues that matches the density of seawater, so that allows them to kind of thrive in these areas, which keeps it safe from apex predators that require a large amount of oxygen. So they are safe from a lot of predators, which is quite interesting. So they also, as you can see, they possess large eyes and optic lobes to be able to see long-ranging light from other bioluminescent animals and their habitat. and monitoring the huge water volume density of prey mates is low. And like many species of deep-sea cephalopods, they don't have ink sacs. So if disturbed, these guys will typically curl their arms upwards and wrap themselves around their body, turning inside out to show these spiky projections. If highly agitated, they actually will eject a sticky cloud of mucus that is bioluminescent that will kind of cover their prey with blue light. And this luminous barrage may last nearly 10 minutes, will dazzle the prey and allow them to disappear, the squid to disappear into the darkness, without being seen. And this ink is also able to stick to the predator, so this actually makes it more risky because they have light on them. That means the predator that's trying to eat the squid is more available to other predators to be seen and eaten. So that's another deterrent, to make sure that they deal away. But this display is only made when the animal is very agitated because it's very risky and cost effective, and so they need to regenerate the mucus, and that costs effort that they don't need to, that they wouldn't want to use. But they also use their bioluminescent organs, as I mentioned, like the head and the tips of their fingers or tips of their arms to attract prey and use them as lures. So in terms of their reproduction and development, it seems to be few specifics are known about their ontogeny or how they grow up, as they seem to have three forms. They have very young animals with a single pair of fins, and then intermediate has two pairs, and then they mature again to one pair. And the earliest intermittent phases is like the pair of fins located in the eye, so it kind of allows them to swim around better. They're very confusing. It is hypothesized that a lot of the knowledge known from other deep-sea cephalopods is that these guys are likely reproducing slowly and use a small number of large eggs. So ovulation will be irregular, and a lot of it is suggested that the female actually will kind of meet with the male eventually and kind of store the spermatophore inside her, or for long periods. So when she's ready to fertilize her eggs, she'll just use that sperm and do that. And during their life, they'll actually go through only one cycle, most things. But very interesting for vampire squids, they actually go through multiple cycles. So they basically traded having lots of babies once. They can have a few babies multiple times throughout their lives, unlike a lot of other species of cephalopods, which is quite interesting. After releasing their eggs, new batches of eggs will be formed after the female vampire squid returns from resting, and this may repeat up to about more than 20 times in their life. And with this is often seen in organisms with high survival animal rate. The vampire squid kind of low-cost reproductive cycle would be expected for this species. So just make things as easy as possible. And then your hatchlings, they are typically about 8 millimeters in length and basically well-developed miniature version of their adult. Though they have like webbing between their arms, their eyes are smaller, and their velar filaments are not fully formed. They do have a yolk, and they basically use that until they're ready to feed. And then the smaller animals will feed on marine snow, so they will eat, falling detritus, so falling bits of dead animals, poo, things like that. But then the mature squid is also thought to, even though be a filtered feeder as well, they will eat larger prey. So they have been observed eating things like small fish, other squids, and gelatinous material that have been seen in their stomachs. Which is very interesting. And reproduction of these guys, as I mentioned, is very unlike other cephalopods. And during mating, the male will pass a packet of sperm where the female takes it and then will store it in a special pouch in her mantle. And when she's ready, she'll use this packet to reproduce. The female will spawn in separate events that if she feels necessary to reproduce, and they will happen quite far apart of each other because of their low metabolism, which is interesting. In terms of their behavior, there's not too much known from their behavior, but there have been some evidences found from ROVs or remotely operated underground vehicles, and there have been some people trying to breed them and not breed them, but catch them and bring them in captivity, with the Monterey Bay Aquarium being the first to ever put vampire squids on display. And very interesting, unlike their more shallow living relatives, they do not spend energy in protracted flight. And they tend to use kind of innovative predator-avoidant tactics to conserve energy. So that fireworks, as we mentioned, erratic movements, things like that, they make it difficult for predators to identify targets. And they have these tail filaments that have been suggested to play a larger role in predator avoidance. So it maybe allows them to feel predators a bit more. And as I mentioned as well, they will kind of, in an action called the pineapple or pumpkin posture, they invert their arms and kind of pull themselves into their body and spread their spiky insides of their tentacles, their arms out to kind of protect themselves from predators. Though they have been found, even though they are mostly safe from predators, they have been found in the stomachs of large deep water fish and also deep diving mammals such as whales and sea lions. So in terms of their evolutionary relationships, so they're actually considered the sisters, relatives of all octopus. So even though they look like a squid and they do look like an octopus as well, the Vampiromorphidae is their own order that is more closely related to octopus than other species. So studies looking into cephalopods' DNA suggest that these guys are the first group of the ornithopodiformes and that diverged. So they're kind of like an in-between between all the groups. It's kind of interesting. So there are extinct relatives that have been found in kind of different formations around the world. There are suspected relatives found in the Jurassic Cretaceous, and another one found in the Kimmeridgian Somhofen limestone. There's a couple species described from there. So as we mentioned, they are found in the fossil record, but there's the only living example today. And in terms of their conservation status, they are not considered endangered or threatened, as their habitat is so remote they're not really impacted by humans, though there is the case, you could say, for microplastics that could be, decreasing their activity and, more space in their digestive tracts. Also, potentially, microplastics is a big issue, especially for babies. They'll be taking in a lot of marine snow, which could be bits of plastic. Also, climate change could be an issue, heating up our oceans. But yeah, really, really cool species. We'll have a look at them, we'll change it to night and have a look at their bioluminescence. Let's have a look. Look how pretty that is. Really, really awesome, isn't it? So this is what they look like around 500 meters deep in the ocean, glowing around trying to attract prey. But yeah, really, really awesome. So, I think this is a great place to end the video. So, thank you everyone for these wonderful mods. And I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Click the bell icon to get notified whenever I upload anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.